Okay, so this next section, we're going to have a talk with Bruce Parry, who's come to join us fresh from Snowdonia. So Bruce Parry is a documentary filmmaker, if there was anyone here who didn't know that. And this is Adam Hunt. He's also one of the partners who've helped organise this whole conference and's been there since the inception and been really supportive. And is a partner in a landscape design agency in Frome. You can read more about that on the website. There was one more thing I needed to say that someone told me to say. Oh yes, if anybody needs to go to the loo or stuff like that, we're going to ask you to go out through that back door and round, so we can keep that door a bit quieter. That was it. Okay. All right. I'll pass this over to you.
Cool. Hey everyone. Wow, that's quite loud. I'll speak down a little bit. Hey everyone. Thank you for coming. I'm going to talk for a little bit and then I'm going to have a chat with Adam afterwards. I don't have so much of a prepared speech, but I do have some things that I brought to share with us that I think that you'll find incredibly interesting. I certainly do. I'm in the middle of a tour at the moment of our Great British Isles with a film that I've been making for the last 7 years. Ever since I left the BBC and our TV sets, I've been working on a project which is a deeper look at the lessons that I had touched upon my time with tribal people. My trip down the Amazon looking at globalization and around the Arctic looking at climate change. And it's kind of my answer to that. And I left the Beeb to go a bit deeper to make a feature film. So that's what I've been working on. And the title of that film is TAWAI, A Voice from the Forest. And so as you can sense, there's a little bit in there that is relevant to what we're all talking about today. In the film, I go back and meet a group of people who I lived with when I was making the TV series Tribe. They're called the Pennan, and they were the last group that I ever visited when I was making my TV series, the 3 series. And having lived with indigenous peoples all over the world, I kind of could sit in any dinner table and wax lyrical about human nature and indigenous rights and wisdom, and thought I'd seen a lot. But when I met the Pennan, I realized that actually I had to reevaluate absolutely everything. And they form the spine of the film that I've made. I went back to go a bit deeper and speak to them. The reason they were so different, well, there was many reasons, but the big thing about them was that they were the only group that I met who were living in a world prior to the domestication of plants and animals. They were nomadic hunter-gatherers still flowing with the rhythms of nature in the forests of Borneo, carrying everything they owned on their shoulders. And when I went back, they had began to settle and turn to agriculture. And so in a way, the film that I've made asks that question, what happened to us all when we stopped flowing with nature and started putting permanent structures in the ground, and when we stopped looking for food in its wild space and started domesticating. And the journey of the film goes in many areas, but a lot of it actually relates very beautifully to what we've heard this morning from Alan about perception, how we see ourselves in relation to that which is around us, how we experience the world, and the type of society that comes about from different ways of perceiving, which is exactly what Alan's just been talking about. Where is Alan? There. Thank you so much for your wonderful talk this morning. We don't go into mycelium in our film, but we definitely do go into perception and these different ways of being. And in my own journey of having lived with tribal people around the world, clearly I learned a lot. But one of the things I noticed and realized more recently was that even though the strapline to my TV series was like one of the tribe, I had actually always pretty much still observed people through the prism of my own Western scientific mindset, a material-based mindset. And although I had been respectful and loving and a family member with many of the groups, I perhaps had always slightly held back and thought, well, we kind of know better now. And a lot of the films that I made before were very much about what people did and how they behaved. And this film is much more about how people think and feel. And so I'm going to show you now the introduction, and I'll talk a little bit about what's been said.
Bị cuối cái nhà ba xí bì cái bị nhà ba xí nhà chơi cái ai á cái bài qua cái cuối bì nhà ba xí bì bị cuối này nhà ba xí bì bị cuối cái này chị hay cái view
It seems that I brought too big a file for the computers. So it's a little bit jumpy. It's and that's the very first sort of sequence of the film, and I showed that because there was a time in my own life when if I'd heard an indigenous person tell me what the trees were saying, I would have perhaps wondered what he meant. Is that a metaphor? How do you know? Therefore, how can it be an experience you've had? And on my journey, I've learned to reevaluate that standpoint. But it was a difficult one for me. Some of you may have seen some of my work, and you've seen that I've partaken in a number of rituals over the years. And clearly during some of these rituals you have altered states of consciousness, you have expanded sense of perception, you leave the limits of your physical body, all sorts of things, as well as all the beautiful healings that might go on in the body. Now the BBC don't show all of that because they have to kind of keep a little bit of a lid on it. But I definitely had some extraordinary experiences. And I remember in the early days coming back and speaking to my very clever intellectual friends who are all professors or whatever and saying, I had this experience. And they're like, Bruce, you idiot, you're just doing a drug. Forget about it. And so sure enough, I would stick it in a box marked just doing a drug and get on with my life because it was super busy. And then collected all these different experiences. But I had so many experiences that after coming down the Amazon, I realized I had to take time out. So I took 2 years out to try and evaluate so much of what was going on. And I remember one day watching a TED talk by the lady Gilbert Taylor, who has a stroke in the left hemisphere of her brain. And in that, she's a brain scientist, and she says, oh, how exciting it is for a brain scientist to study a stroke from the inside. And she talks about her motor function collapse during this terrible experience. But I remember at one time she describes looking down at her arm and saying that she couldn't distinguish where the molecules of her hand ended and the rest of the universe began. And I was like, oh my God, that's the experience that I had when I was with the indigenous peoples taking some of these indigenous medicines. And that inspired me to go back to that box and take the lid back off and go, okay, there are answers for this that are rational, that there are perhaps on the fringe of science, but still people who I can look up to and respect who are describing these things in a way that makes sense to me. And that led me to a gentleman called Ian McGilchrist, who features in our film, who talks about the hemispheres and perception and how these different ways of perceiving can offer us different insights and ways of being. So that's kind of what the film's about, and we head off to India and learn to meditate and all this sort of stuff. And I guess I asked the question in the film because when I go to the Pennan, who are the nomadic hunter-gatherers, and this transition that we've all been through from nomadic hunter-gathering to settled farmer, there are a number of things that clearly shift during this time, many of them very rational. When you're a nomad, you can't carry your food, you can't store it, you can't dry it, so it's very rational that you share. When you're a nomad, well, there's many things that are very rational about those shifts, but there was also something else that I couldn't put my finger on at that time. There was something about the way they were. And so the thing that we look at in the film is when you're hunting and when you're foraging, you have to be fully present in your senses in the moment in order to get the monkey. If you're drifting off, you're just not going to get it, because you can bet your bottom dollar the monkey's present. So hunting is a form of meditation, and it's actually a daily practice of meditation. Likewise, foraging, for those of you who know it, when I go off walking my dog, I often just looking at the horizon drifting off in my mind, but when I learn to forage, I have to be fully present to what is naturally growing around me. And it's a very different state of awareness. So we ask the question in the film, did we come from a time when we were daily meditating and using that part of ourselves that was exercising that form of presence? And then, of course, you can be an incredibly present, intuitive, empathic person as a farmer, but you don't have to be. And is this one of those things that over time has shifted and that we've entered into this other way of seeing ourselves as separate and obviously as superior to when you start manipulating and controlling nature through the domestication of plants and animals? There's no surprise that over time we've seen ourselves as above and apart from. So is this part of the transition we've all been on? So that's kind of the container by which we offer the film, and I go off to India and learn to meditate and ask the question, are tools like meditation, yoga, ayahuasca, whatever, things that we have found in order to bring us back to this place of connection? And so that's kind of a little insight into the film. But the Pennan, who I spend most of my time with, have shifted their beliefs. And so they're now very Christianized, and they have a slightly different understanding of their ancestral relationship. All of the intuitive feelings of connection and guidance that they once had, the things that they could and couldn't do. And they're now operating in a different system where they say, well, as long as we believe in him, we can kind of do what we want. So the area of belief also becomes a part of the story that we follow. So I head off to the forest to meet another group who still very much hold on to their beliefs, and I'm going to show you a little clip about when I meet them. I hope it flows.
Ai pa che ap. Ai che cái ai pi hai. Ai che kosa ka so kawai pu ke. Ai nya hoa hai. Ai ko cái ai che cái che cột che ka pi ai. O kêu. Ai kapio ai kai sa hai ai này qua bài pi se ka má pi ha ba pi ha cái kapio. Ai kawai pu. Nya hoa.
It's supposed to be music here. Torch. I'm just wondering, when you stopped, are you thinking with words or are you just feeling with your senses?
Ai coi cái nhà hoa yêu si. Ai yêu si. Pai pie. Ai pai pie. Nhà hoa. Ai cosa ko coi pi kapikui. Ai coi pi kapikui ai cosa ka. Ai nhảy cột chế heo ấy nhảy ai
Um, hmm. Yeah, it's better on the big screen. So that's a group of people called the Piraha, who are actually very famous at the moment. They're quite in the news with their language. The reason I went to meet them was because I'd heard about them. They're famous for having allegedly no future or past tense to their language, and so clearly are very present. There's not many people speak their language, and translating this is incredibly complex and difficult, and there's a lot of interpretation. And we tried our very best to get it right. But I went back out and met up with another linguist to go through it all, and so I really feel that we have got a pretty good grasp of what it is they were saying. But when I first heard about them, I knew not only that they were present, but that they had these entities, forces, spirits that were guiding them. And that was what I went to go and ask, was like, how are you communicating with these dudes? Because I hadn't read about that anywhere. What is this? Is it an intuitive thing from inside, or is it a connection to a universal? What exactly is this? And I can't say that I've come here with any answers to that question, but what you have is one or two of the characters that we've met describing what this guidance might be. And you'll notice that the guidance offers him advice about what to do and what not to do. And there is an element of respect for the natural order there, it seems. This is contentious. Some people who've lived with this group might look at it differently, but this is the testimony that I received when I was there. But the most exciting thing was when I said to him, "How does Kawubage speak to you?" He said, "Into my heart." I had no idea that he was going to say that. I had no idea. I didn't go there with that expectation. But during the course of the film also, I'm kind of giving the whole film away now, you don't need to go and watch it there. During the course of the film as well, when I go and hang out with some sadhus in India for the Kumbh Mela, this huge gathering, they're also saying the same thing about the intuitive understanding, the intuitive wisdom coming from the heart. and how to go about discerning that. So kind of you can see where the film goes. And so I found that to be very compelling and missing and fitting very much with what Alan was saying about perception and feeling. And I'm gonna just show you the last clip before I have a little chat with Adam. But before we press play, I'll just perhaps contextualize this a little more. So this last scene is a bit perplexing, actually, because it raises some really big questions. And again, I had no idea that they were going to say this, and even when I had it translated with the wonderful lady who helped me out there, she was like, "Oh my God, I've never heard them say this before," and she was worried, and I was worried. It was like it's a complex thing that we've brought home, and I really hope that we're holding it in the integrity of which it's, or as high an integrity as I can. But it is in the film. And what's really interesting is that I'm going on this tour with the film at the moment, showing it in cinemas around the country, asking questions and answers from audiences, and there's so many questions already in the film, but no one's asking me about this. It feels like next level stuff, almost like what's actually going on here. So with that very big build up, let's have a look, and then I'll hand over to Adam to take the lead on the questions.
Bobby, nhà chị ibu tupi ungiu này, với Bobby này, nhà chị áo này, ungiu ibu tupi này, Bobby, ibu tupi này, cậu ấy bụi áo pi này, với ugi này, ibu tupi cậu ấy bụi này, với ugi. Hóa sa ha chích cô bằng huy say cả nhiều cá áo cây sa chích cô ấy say cả hóa ấy quế ai phụ này ui ok thì với tụi cái ai nhà chị áo em
So in recent years, they've turned to agriculture, and it seems that this intuitive voice that they've always received. Are we going to stand? Yeah. Is still there, but for some reason they're choosing an alternative way, and that's really big. And I don't know what it means. I don't know what it means for us. I don't know what it means for humanity or this moment or them or anything. All I know is that I tried my very best to get the most accurate translations I could of what they were saying, and this is what I've brought home. So I really hope that I'm doing this story justice, and I'm really, I'm just doing my best, but it is what they said, and so I felt it to be an important thing to feel into and question and offer. So I'm going to hand over to Adam to ask me a question or two.
Yeah. Oh, brilliant. Okay. Do you want to sit down or stand up?
How do you feel?
Stand up.
Stand up?
Yeah.
Okay, mate. I might put you on the spot.
Thanks, Bruce. I was sent a link to the video to have a look, and it didn't work, and Bruce was on the move, so that's the first time I've seen it. And to be honest, that's just blown me away. I'm not. I've got a wow, not a question. But something I think that I know that Susie's been really keen on is that we try and hold all the different views that are here respectfully, and I think this is particularly sensitive. Well, not sensitive, but requires integrity, and it's a really beautiful thing. I mean, it sort of plays to the 5-year-old in me. You know, he used to hug the oak tree at the end of the garden. So I think my first, there's a few questions, but my first question is, are they, in a way, that the Pennan that you were with who are turning to agriculture, are they hearing these voices? Are they ignoring them, or have they actually lost the ability to hear them? Or?
Yeah, so this is a group called the Piraha, and there's 2 tribes that we meet in the film. And the Pennan are the ones we spend the most time with, who are much better studied and I know much more about. The reason we came to this group that you've just been witnessing is because their belief system and their experience of this connection is more intact. The Pennan, who've been about 3 generations Christianized, what we feel in the film is, when I started investigating these questions about their spirit, history, and their relationship, is that we can go so far, but they've started to deny it and go, oh, that's superstitious nonsense from before, because they're, for whatever reason it is they say that. I mean, they're clearly influenced by new voices coming in, and we ask the question about what is it to change belief? How is it? What does that feel like? What is, and also not only what does it feel like, but how does that also offer this alternate perspective of our relationship to each other and to the environment when we put humans at the center, versus when the Pennan previously were seeing themselves very much as a part of everything, not above or beneath, but they're egalitarian people, and that egalitarianism spreads out into the forest. They clearly are hunting and gathering, so it's not that they are not part of that cycle of life and death, as you put in your lovely slides. They understand the cycle of life and death, but they're not excessive, and they have tools within their society to limit excess, where they play at each other. But this group I know much less about. I have to be honest, they're much less studied, and so I just went and had a very tiny taste, and I brought back the small, and it was very hard to get things translated, but I found it so compelling that I felt a duty to offer it. But yeah, they being so present are receiving, not all of them are receiving guidance from something, and many people in this room have the same experience, but culturally we don't really go with it. They're culturally, they're with it, but what you see here is this slight move away from that, following the guidance, and it just strikes me that perhaps that was a time that we also all once shared, and maybe that wound is in us all still.
You want to sit down now? There's the glare.
Oh, am I too bright?
There is the glare of that. That's quite bright.
Okay.
So it's an incredible moment in time, isn't it? It's a moment in time that almost was happening here, perhaps 3, 4, on this island 3,000 or 4,000 years ago. But when talking previously about this conference, this question, are trees sentient? And then listening to Alan's talk, and then seeing it does come through that this idea of how we relate to nature, the rational approach is a bit inadequate, or it has its limitations, as does scientific to some degree. But I mean, do you think this approach has something in it that can enable us to deal with the problem going on now? And if it is, how do we look at it? It's not an approach. This phenomena, I guess, if you like, this way of being.
Yeah. Well, I think in order to be able to experience what it is perhaps that these people are experiencing is a number of things that we have to do. And one of them is to slow down and feel more deeply into ourselves, into our bodies. And there are tools like meditation, yoga, ayahuasca that can allow us to do that. But of course, in order to feel more deeply, we have to feel the good stuff and the bad stuff. And it just so happens that to really go in there and feel who we are and what we're doing in the world and how we're behaving, it's hard to really truly wake up to what we are doing on this planet and how we are with it. So to my mind, it's no surprise that we are anesthetizing ourselves from those feelings, sticking our heads in the sand, addicted to all sorts of stuff that keeps us from being present and feeling. But I think that our only route forward is to go into that feeling, because if we don't, then we're just going to carry on blindfolded off the cliff. But I also think, and one of the things that I hope that the film offers is an offering to not beat ourselves up about that, because we may well be the generation that's waking up to it and that has to deal with it, but it isn't necessarily our doing. This has come about for a long, long, long time. And yeah, we're the ones who are seeing the repercussions of what's been happening for all of the previous generations have been part of. And we're all complicit, but at the same time, if we feel too bad about it and beat ourselves up about it, then we're not going to resolve it. So we have to have some softness and some compassion to ourselves, but we also, I think, have to go into the feeling. And with that will be the guidance. With that will be some inspiration for the right way to go. But I think the first step is to feel it.
Switch the TV off after your film.
That's so sweet.
Bit closer, yeah. Okay. Are they? It's funny. I keep thinking I'm using my rational head. I guess I've got to discuss this.
Yeah.
But and categorizing things, defining things. Is this a mythological realm that they're talking about, or is this as kind of apparent and close as the animals and the trees around them, or is this just a crazy non-question that doesn't really work in that kind of circumstance?
Well, of course I can't answer exactly because I have no real knowledge, only my own experiences to bring some kind of perception. I know that when I'm in, as I'm sure you and others are in a state where we feel more empathically connected to that which is around us, many of those distinctions blur. So you look at a group like the Piraha, their language, which is a fascinating language and the subject of much debate at the moment, they're much less likely to categorize as we do. Things are more like. They don't have numbers. They don't have colors, but things might be blood-like or leaf-like. Because when we name things, we stick it in a box and put it to one side and nothing can touch it. But of course, this is green and this is green, but by naming it, we've already killed the essence of anything that's in between. And so for them, it strikes me, and this is only a supposition, and linguists may take umbrage at this, but it strikes me that at the heart of the way they're speaking is an insight into how they see things as interconnected and flowing. And at the heart of how we speak is this insight into how we see things as very separate. And I also think the hemispheres play a part in that. Most of the language centre is in the left, but poetry, song are much more in the right. And this is perhaps a place where they're more communicating from. And that hemisphere is the one that perhaps sees things as more interconnected and sees things in the context of the wider. And so it could quite well be that they are abiding in a space whereby they are feeling and experiencing the world in a much more dynamic, interconnected whole. And we are seeing things in a much more separated, decontextualized way. And I think there's something in that. So it's very hard for us to go, what's going on? We can only touch on it on those moments of deep meditation or just coming out of a ceremony somewhere in Glastonbury.
Or a poem.
Or a poem.
Yeah, a poem indeed. Yeah. This meditation, as a boy, I loved fishing. And one of the things that, going into adulthood, one of the reasons that I carried on fishing, was this focus that I would have while I was fly fishing and sort of crawling around a river. But I recently, a while back, stopped to a large degree because a lot of the fish are not there anymore. And I can see the rivers are not what they were. And the salmon runs are not how they used to be, nor the trout as large as they used to be. And I slightly I've hung my rods up around this grief because it keeps reminding me. I mean, and that leads me on to this question, which I think we're beginning to discuss in relation to the environment, but it's around grief. And I guess one is whether you're seeing a grief in those two communities that you were with, the Pennan and the other one whose name I can't. Piraha. But also your grief. I'm kind of interested how you work with that, because it must be very intense, kind of being in that circumstance and then flying back into Heathrow or wherever it is, and suddenly getting assaulted with the Wi-Fi and such like.
Yeah. Thank you for that question. It's really beautiful. I think you're touching on something that's really real. There is a grief, and even sometimes I'm not aware of it, but it arises. I did a clown course a few years ago. I used to live in Spain. Clown school down the road. I did a clown course, and for 2 of the weeks, it was a 3-month course or something, but like 2 of the weeks we had a sound therapist come and do exercises with us in the morning, and we were just doing all sorts of song and dance stuff. And there was one occasion when we were all in a circle and we had to just jump in and sing whatever notes or songs, whatever it was. It was kind of terrifying stuff. My God. But anyway, it was one of my fears, so I wanted to confront it. Anyway, so I was part of this thing and I jumped in and did my little song and dance bit or whatever. And the guy who was taking the course goes, Bruce, at the end of that, he goes, can I just take you to one side for a second in front of the group? And I just spotted something in the way you were singing. Can I just explore that in front of everyone? I was like, yeah, sure, man, whatever. So he goes, sing that thing. I was like, la 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 la, whatever it was. And he said, that note there, what? And I was like, la. He goes, yeah, that note, just hold that, but push it. And I was like, okay, sure, weird. I had no idea where he was taking me. La. And then he was like, more, la. And then suddenly, when I really pushed it, I won't do it here. I just suddenly burst into tears, absolute floods of tears, and all I could see in my head was the tar sands and the deforestation and all of that, and it had not been in my consciousness until that moment, and suddenly it was like some resonant aspect of all of the trauma of Mother Nature herself and what I had seen, which was clearly stored inside me, unlocked by some radio wave of my inner resonance, just like bursting forth, and just absolute tears. So yeah, clearly it is affecting me, but we're all very good at being in our heads and putting things in boxes and getting on with our lives. But I'm carrying it, and I think we're all carrying it. Maybe it just brimmed over with me because I had so much. But I think deep down, to truly be present, truly, truly deeply present to what's happening, is a deep grief.
I mean, it seemed like that was inherent in the last bit, in the last clip. That was grief being expressed, wasn't it?
I think so. Yeah, it's hard to know with the intonation of their tonal language. Is really hard to understand. Is clearly where happiness and sadness, because it's a very complex way that they communicate. But the words, I mean, yeah, wow. I mean, that's like we're in conflict with it all. That's them having chosen another way for whatever reason, and probably having to go through their own process of denial of a part of themselves as a result of wanting something else or moving into something else. That's going to have its effect, I think. But I think, because I don't know how we're doing for time, but I really think it also, I think it is worth saying that even though this can be a very heavy experience, and I think that this conversation is important, and the grief is important to honor and be with. But I just really want to stress once again that, it's, and I think that what the film has is it does have hope within it. I mean, this isn't the climax of the film. We go into other spaces and there's lots of hope because it offers insights into other ways of being and how humans can be and are amazing. What's the depth of inside of all of us is so beautiful and so bright, and how these communities are. So there's definitely hope there. And also this offering of compassion for not beating ourselves up. I really want to stress that again. But it does mean, or does necessitate, if we want to believe this, a shift in attention, a shift in awareness, and a moving towards the heart. Thank you very much.
Very good, Bruce.
10 minutes.
10 minutes.
Yeah, we did okay.
I love it, Bruce. We've got to end on a positive note.
Okay.
Thanks for that. We've got 10 minutes. Are there any questions for Bruce? Just a few. You there?
Hi, it's more of an observation, or not an observation, it's something that I want to say. Talking about grief and Alan, coming back to Alan's talk earlier, and the idea that the grief is relating to the fungal network pathways. So for me, there's something about when you're talking about that explosion of grief outpourings, like when Alan was talking about the gas, the blockages in the chambers of the fungal system, yeah. And then the fungal can push through. So
I'm a little fungus. Finally, the penny drops.
That's when the grief becomes a necessary part of the bigger network.
Thank you so much for that. That's wonderful.
Another question.
I shall dream about it.
Yeah, and Susie's asking, can everyone introduce themselves, please? So, next question.
Hello, Keki. I'm wondering what is their interpretation and yours of why they're moving from a hunter-gatherer lifestyle to agricultural, and also if there are any external influences affecting that.
Yeah, I think definitely there are. The main reason is because of external forces. I don't know so much about the Piraha because there's not so much studied about them. But the Pennan, they are losing their land. The oil pipelines coming through, the loggers taking their land, potential dam project as well. And so they're I mean, it's interesting. It's at the beginning of the film. I go into the garden with my friend Ara and we start putting stuff down. He goes, look, I've no idea kind of what I'm doing, but we've been shown that if you stick this thing in here, that something grows. And, they really are like, we're only doing this because our fruit trees are just going. And we understand that if we do this might help us in the future. But it's only as a result of the loss of the normal habitat for the things that they feed with or from. And it's tragic for them because they have no right to their ancestral home. Interestingly, in Malaysia, there's many indigenous groups who do have rights to their land in Malaysia, but in order to be able to ascertain rights to your land, you have to prove that you've been there. And the Penang can't do that. So light is their touch. So they're struggling. But it gives an indication of just how special they are. But they're clearly the hunter-gatherer lifestyle and the farming lifestyle can't exist in the same space. So traditionally, nomadic hunter-gatherers would just go further in. But Malaysia, they've got nowhere left to go, so they're kind of the last. And in a sense, it's the last holdout. And they've seen many of their cousins go through change because their land's already burned. This is just the last family groups. Most of the Penang have settled already, but they're holding out because they've seen what's happened to their cousins, and they're given cars and schools and houses. Where so much has shifted for them in a way that this group just doesn't want to follow. So they're not just being resolute for the sake of it, they're being resolute because they've seen. And there's so many things beyond just what we're talking about here that is applicable to how they live, their egalitarianism and sharing, their equality, all of that comes under threat and they begin to settle. So that's why also they're really holding on. And the Piraha, I think they're definitely, I heard them talk to me about how trawler boats come through occasionally and take in fish. So they're definitely, the forces of globalization are everywhere. They're just everywhere. And of course, we're also a part of that.
I'm going to go from back.
Working? Yeah.
I'm Ben, and I just wanted to ask you something that's to share experiences you've had with tree plants.
That's fair. Yeah, I've been caught out by friends a few times, crying my eyes out, hugging trees. I have. That's maybe me more than the tree. I've definitely had experiences where I've merged with other species, including plant species. But in those moments, it's been interesting in that I have become it, and it has become me, but I haven't been aware. I've never had a communication directly from another species to myself in the way that the Piraha seem to have. I've had moments when I have melted into other, but I've never experienced other as separate, connecting with me as another entity, if you will. I can't say I've had that, but I'm working on it, Ben.
You and I are broken, from this place to ever show. Heaven I approach it from a place of letting go. Bring this over, breathe this fantasy to deliver. Days I imagine we reading signs. Please come in fragile. You and I alone in the face of letting go.